Abercrombie thought many old buildings had simply outlived their usefulness.
He pointed out that a lot of the houses were built in Jane Austen's day, and they were suitable for people in the kind of living conditions that Jane Austen described. But those conditions did not prevail in 1945 or the years onwards.
Abercrombie's ideas about what to save would seal the fate of many of Bath's unprotected buildings. Those listed Grade 3 were like lambs to the slaughter. Though many of Abercrombie's grand ideas were too expensive ever to see the light of day, others simply wouldn't go away. The council embraced Abercrombie's zones for housing. That meant bulldozing old buildings which lacked essential mod cons and replacing them with new estates, like this one. At Snow Hill, a dozen Georgian terraces were torn down to make way for Bath's one and only tower block. And it wasn't just new housing that would later expose the shortcomings of the listing system. It was also the car. As private car ownership exploded, Bath became gridlocked. To solve the problem, the council commissioned the transport guru of the time, Colin Buchanan. But how would he cope with the demands of this historic city?
There is a direct clash there between the historic environment, which is really unalterable, and the desires of movement across the same area. Yes, I agree there is a problem here.
Buchanan's proposal was nothing if not ambitious: to build a tunnel beneath the centre of Bath. The scheme would remove cars from the heart of the city, but to allow traffic in and out, many listed buildings would have to be demolished. While the council deliberated over this scheme, these houses were effectively condemned and allowed to rot. But the final nail in the coffin for many of Bath's buildings happened in the early 70s. 9 acres of Georgian streets in the Southgate area of the city centre were reduced to rubble to make way for a shopping mall.
We had lots and lots of Georgian property, some of it terrible, in very, very bad condition. That was demolished and we built the original Southgate development now. It seemed the right thing to do to me at the time, and we were going to get a new shiny shopping development.
At the time, few people valued the ordinary landscapes of Bath. Most were fixated on the big set pieces. Yet among the local people who lived in the streets being torn down, opposition was growing. One couple began to document the vanishing town. Gosh, and even whole, well, I mean, were buildings, whole terraces like this being demolished?
Oh, yes.
Ruth Cord's husband, Peter, devoted all his spare time to making nearly 2,000 drawings of condemned buildings before they were lost forever. Was it the human quality, the architecture that was disappearing?
And all the lesser buildings, it didn't matter how humble they were, they all seemed to have something different about them. The different ornamentation and different door cases, different doors, different letterboxes, all sorts, everything. There wasn't a sameness about it that we see so much now. Everything had character.
What are the buildings that were being demolished? What do they add to the town?
Well, they were the town, weren't they? I mean, they showed the way of life of the Georgian population.
For many of these ordinary 18th century properties, it was already too late. By the early 70s, more than 1,000 Georgian buildings had been demolished. Against the onslaught of modernisation, it seemed like the listing system had failed. Finally, in 1973, a campaign to save Bath was kick-started by a journalist who was appalled at what was happening to Britain's most beautiful city.
When you actually see the bulldozers at work, when you see the rubble lying around, then you look at the photographs of what used to stand there, because that's all one had then. Anger, I suppose, is the main thing one felt. And everyone fully appreciated the big set pieces, and they are very lovely. But the idea that the set pieces were losing their frames didn't really register with people until they were being pulled down. But the problem was that Bath had a huge number of houses which were protected, but an even vaster number which system.
With the backing of conservation lobby group, the Bath Preservation Trust, Ferguson wrote a book, Photos of Buildings that had been torn down, and ones that had replaced them. It caused a sensation. There were extensive articles in the press. Appeals were launched to raise money for the conservation cause.
Before the war, Bath was the most beautiful city in England.
Even Britain's most famous art historian, Kenneth Clark, made an impassioned plea.
About 20 years ago, the developers moved in, and they knocked down whole streets. However, we can stop them. It isn't too late. A lot of Bath is still here. We can stop them with the help of the Bath Preservation Trust.
The uproar against new development wasn't confined to Bath. All over the country, alarm bells were ringing over the destruction of old towns and cities. In Cheltenham, Edinburgh and London, people took to the streets in protest. In Bath, the residents won their fight to stop Buchanan's road tunnel. At last, the local authority began to sit up and take notice.
The campaign to save Bath was so successful, the council changed tack. Bath's historic buildings were resurveyed, and instead of demolishing buildings like these, they started to do them up. The council even published a book called Saving Bath.
With so much of the historic city gone, it became even more important to protect what was left. In 1975, a new list of buildings was published, and it was twice the length of the previous one. The Grade 3 category was abolished, and many of the same buildings were redesignated at Grade 2 level and became protected. But the struggle to save the city was by no means over.